Yeah, not terrible points. Not terrible points. I largely agree. I obviously like it more than he does, but I agree. Like I said, there are genuine, completely valid complaints to this movie. There are definite issues with this movie.
This Organized Chaos video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello again. Doing a request. I do want to get more requests in there. It takes a while. This is from a friend of the channel. He's been on here for a while. Like his input. I think he's done a few requests, and he has some good ones. Here's a suggestion for you for your next video. Not much positivity, unfortunately, but also a hint of anti-wokeness crap. And no link, so kind of a mystery here. So we're gonna do this. We're gonna see what this video is. Now, I also kind of have to admit that this says 37 minutes ago. That's when I grabbed the screen cap and record this for the request log. It's been a while since then. So I dug up the actual request on here, and it was from a month ago. So we're gonna click on this and find this out right now. Captain Midnight. I haven't watched Captain Midnight in a while. I don't recall having a huge issue with him. I usually find him a little bit, I found his takes weren't particularly deep. I don't have a huge... Yeah, I don't recall having an issue with him. I never recall feeling that he was anti-woke. I hope this isn't like some sort of sign that he's going to go that way. Captain Midnight, the huge missed potential of Thor Love and Thunder. Okay. We are going to check this out. And it's worth remembering, if you remember me talk about Thor Love and Thunder, I guess mainly on the podcast, I enjoy it, but it's not perfect at all. It's got lots of issues.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Before I start, I should say that this will feature full spoilers for Thor Love and Thunder. So, this is not the video I wanted to make about this movie. Longtime viewers will know that I really enjoyed Thor Ragnarok back in 2017, and its follow-up has honestly been one of my most anticipated MCU projects. Taika Waititi has made some films that I really liked in the past, and it seemed like a pretty solid bet that he would deliver here too. But after seeing it, I don't think Love and Thunder works. I don't think it works as a dramatic Thor story in basically any way, and to make matters worse, I also don't think it's a particularly funny comedy.
So I'll keep an eye out for anti-wokeness. I do think there are plenty, like, if you watch this movie and say you don't like it, I think there's plenty of valid complaints you can throw at it. We'll see if he goes down the anti-woke rabbit hole at all. Let's see. He might be looking for those sweet, sweet YouTube monies, because the right-wing grift seems to be profitable right now. We'll be talking about on the podcast how CNN is currently going to be angling towards a right-wing news network soon, which I guess probably will be better for them money-wise, because they're just kind of blah now. Corporate news, I guess, now. Bland corporate news, and then soon they'll be right-wing corporate news. Listen, man, corporate news is an issue. It's a serious issue. But regular corporate news is better than right-wing corporate news by a long shot.
To be brutally honest, I think this one is almost a complete misfire. The most frustrating part of it is, I feel like all the ingredients were here for something great. This is a movie that features a really good cast, and some interesting concepts and characters worth exploring. But when all is said and done, Thor 4 seems too in love with its own loosely scripted comedy bits to do anything effective with those ingredients.
If my father have no desire to converse, then I shall return to earth. I say thee, nay. The fury in your eyes.
Let's start where the film itself does, with Gore the God Butcher. The film opens somberly, with a scene where Christian Bale's Gore, desperate for food and water, is forced to bury his dead daughter under the harsh desert sun. After that harrowing experience, he wanders into what appears to be a tropical oasis, only to find the god he once worshipped lounging there, completely indifferent to his hardships and mocking the very idea that he and his daughter's lives hold any value.
Yeah, I thought it's different from comic books. It's simplified from comic books. I think it works fairly well, though. The CG in this scene was the CGI specific. The CGI in that scene was spotty, to say the least. The CGI throughout the movie is very spotty.
And let me just say, I think this is a fantastic origin story. Not only does Bale do an amazing job of playing the grief and anger that Gore is going through here, but we immediately understand why he's willing to go to these lengths to kill every god. I will say though, I do think this opening scene could have been even better. The evil god-killing sword just kind of floats into his hand at the best possible moment, for no real rhyme or reason. By giving this scene just a little bit more room to breathe, I think it could have set up Gore a lot more effectively. Instead of the sword just arbitrarily choosing him because it happens to be laying on the ground, Gore could have outwitted the god, used the god's hubris against him, and demonstrated why he's a force to be reckoned with beyond just being a sad guy who gets a magic sword. That nitpick and some...
Yeah, no, I agree that's a nitpick. It's not a terrible idea. Yeah. I do think there's probably stuff cut from this movie. There are, like, there's, this, like, at first, like, Jane gets Mjolnir. And you assume she gets it because she's worthy. But then you find out Thor puts an enchantment on it. But then you do find out she's worthy, but there's no conversation about whether or not she's worthy, if she is actually worthy. And the movie does, like, firmly, like, say it firmly implies she's worthy. But I felt like there was definitely, like, a storyline there that they didn't really touch on.
Dodgy CGI aside, I thought it was a really effective opening scene, and honestly I couldn't wait to see Thor have to confront the sins of the gods, that Gore would no doubt throw in his face. Here's the thing, that didn't really happen. After that opening scene, Bale still gets some decent moments, but he's mostly stuck being a mustache-twirling villain under a mountain of Nosferatu makeup. Everything that was potentially interesting about this character is just wasted almost immediately. And it's made extra frustrating by the fact that the movie goes to such great lengths to show that he's almost entirely correct about the gods. These gods are shown to be egotistical buffoons who...
Well, yeah, lots of them are. The huge exception that exists in the movie would be Thor and Mighty Thor, if you count that. I guess Valkyrie probably won't count as a god. Thor is the huge exception in this movie. Thor is the reason why maybe he shouldn't kill all gods.
Couldn't possibly care less about what happens to people like Gore's daughter. Now this could have also been a really worthwhile story development, because it places Thor and Jane in a very interesting ethical dilemma. They want to stop Gore, but they're seeing mounting evidence that a lot of what he's saying is correct. How does that impact each of them? Does it change how they view themselves, or the hierarchy of the gods around them? Does Jane maybe have second thoughts about embracing her godlike power now that she's seen how careless and cruel they often are? Basically, the answer to
I don't feel like the movie truly is like... I mean, it's not the worst idea for a story, but that's huge. That's a big rewrite, in my opinion. That's not the
all those questions that the movie comes up with is... Why would you care about any of this lame story crap? Here's another screaming goat joke. Love and Thunder seems to have a commitment to not taking any aspect of its own story seriously, apart from Jane's cancer, and even that it manages to severely undercut in a bad post-credit scene. If anything, this...
Okay, so the post-credit scene he's talking about, I assume, is where she goes to Valhalla and meets with Heimdall. I don't see why that undercuts
the movie
it.
Seems actively annoyed that it had to bother having a story at all and couldn't just be high-budget improv comedy. Now, all of that would be a lot easier for me to forgive if more of the jokes landed. I feel like this movie has a lot more jokes than Ragnarok did, but the jokes don't actually land nearly as often.
I'll tell you what the issue is. Ragnarok spaced out its jokes a lot better. This movie actually doesn't have as it's not as joke heavy as lots of people imply, but I forgive people for getting that impression, because the problem is it has a super joke-heavy beginning. Once we get past the gore stuff, we get to Thor, and that is super fucking joke-heavy. Intensely joke-heavy, that just leaves that overly jokey sense on you through the rest of the movie. The beginning just need to tone down the jokes way too much. Thor kicks serious ass in that beginning, but he is also being way too much the goofball. Yes, that the humor in the beginning specifically need toned down. There's actually lots of good jokes in this movie, but that the humor in the beginning was too much.
And if you don't like one of those jokes, like the screaming goats or Jane's search for a new catchphrase, well, I have very bad news, because the movie wants to go back to those wells over and over again. When it comes to establishing anything...
Yeah, I thought the goats were done cleverly, but like, if you don't like it, you don't like it. What they do with the goats is they overuse the fuck out of them in the beginning. This is actually one of the things that kind of works with the overly jokey. I think my issues with the jokes in the beginning are mainly due with Thor. The goats, yeah, they get a bit much in the beginning, but then they leave them alone for a while. And then just out of nowhere, I don't want to break the scene, but just something happens. You don't really think about it, something happens, and then you just hear the scream again. And you're like, oh, that's right. And you just chuckle again. They overkill you on it, then they bring you back. The goats kind of work.
That's not just a running gag. The movie often feels pretty indifferent about the whole thing. Take New Asgard, which is now turned into a tourist trap, complete with an ice cream shop named after the Infinity Stones, in a very misplaced gag.
Yeah, I don't really like that
Valkyrie
gag
seems to have made peace with Asgard, once a majestic and proud kingdom, being reduced to a Ren Fair attraction. How the Asgardians actually feel about their current circumstances is less than an afterthought. It's really not even addressed. Because really, why have...
That's an interesting point. Yeah, maybe bring that up. I think you could really explore that through Valkyrie. That's not a terrible idea. I like
a scene where the weight of leadership means something to Valkyrie, or we actually take New Asgard seriously, when we should really be doing lame gags about dancing to portable speakers instead. I'm not saying the movie should have been humorless or anything like that. On his better outings, comedy is clearly one of this director's strengths. But does it have to undercut everything else in the movie? Valkyrie was a breakout character in the last film, but what they've given her here is really disappointing. Sure, she gets to do a few cool action moves, but her actual role as the ruler of Asgard doesn't matter to the plot at all, and she's sidelined for the final battle entirely. The same can kind of be said of Korg. In Ragnarok, he helped lead a slave uprising. In this one, he doesn't do much of consequence other than say one-liners. His speech near the end of the film tells us that he has...
Yeah, not terrible points. Not terrible points. I largely agree. I obviously like it more than he does, but I agree. Like I said, there are genuine, completely valid complaints to this movie. There are definite issues.
Has a boyfriend now, who he met off screen, which seems like an odd choice in a movie where he doesn't actually have anything to do and could have used a romance subplot of his own. As it is, the thoughts and feelings of Thor's weapon.
I don't really feel like that's particularly anti-woke. I thought the boyfriend was just kind of a fun gag, just like, something you never knew. I thought that kind of, I don't think that's much of a complaint, though. I think that was a fun little, that gag kind of works. Because you don't really know that much about Korg, and then you find out he's with somebody, and it's our dude, and it's like, oh, that's nice.
Weapons are given more impactful moments than those of Korg or Valkyrie. Then there's Thor himself. I think Endgame and Ragnarok mostly did a good job of giving us a more goofy, comedic Thor without selling out the character wholesale. Yes, the Thor of Endgame is often played as a joke, but his response to the end of Infinity War makes perfect sense. He wasn't just played as a joke, he was someone dealing with the weight of the universe being placed on his shoulders and failing. Here, they seem to retcon that he's actually been hung up on Jane this whole time, which doesn't really mesh to me with his past few appearances, but okay, I can deal with that as a mildly forced development. What I have a harder time getting over is just how stupid Thor is in this movie. Don't get me wrong, there's always been a huge element of comedy.
I don't recall him being particularly stupid, but he is very goofy in the beginning, which is, like I said, that's an issue.
To MCU Thor. Like, half of his original movie is a fish-out-of-water comedy, but I don't think they've ever presented him as pathetic and clueless as he is here. He comes off like New Asgard's drunk uncle who rolls into town to knock some things over, apologize, and fly off. And how our leads react to Gore's kidnapping of the kids is just really weird. It kind of feels like they barely care, and instead are completely wrapped up in their own drama.
They barely care. They immediately set out to try to track him down and stop him as fast as they can. I don't know how that qualifies as barely caring.
The scene where Thor addresses New Asgard before they all fly off is played purely for laughs. For the second or even third time in the movie, they repeat the joke of him giving a really bad hero speech that quickly goes off the rails. I kind of liked this gag the first time in that scene with the Guardians, but it feels so off here. He's addressing the people of Asgard, many of whom are presumably the concerned parents of kids kidnapped by a murderer, and it never occurs to Love and Thunder to treat that with any sort of weight or seriousness at all. How the movie plays it, Thor, Jane, and Valkyrie might as well be leaving on a voyage to pick up some beer from the corner store. When you look at Thor in this movie, stupid, destructive, and often totally lacking in self-awareness, it's hard not to conclude that, hey, maybe Gore the God Butcher has a point about these gods being terrible. But of course, any actual ethical dilemmas that could come from Gore are completely neutralized by the fact that his plan is kidnapping innocent kids and then skulking around to kind of mock them. What could have been a fascinating villain with a point of view that makes sense within the context of this world is just reduced to another scary-faced monster.
Yeah, not true. I think Christian Bale does a good job. I do think the character is underwritten. They have a cool origin for him, and then they have a good ending for him, but yeah, in the end, he's just kind of a monster. And I'm kind of okay with just doing the monster thing, but I felt like if they're gonna take that angle, really fucking lean into it. Like, he has that thing where he disappears into his shadows to reappear out of other shadows. It's like they could have really gone hard or horror with that, and they really don't. You just see it a few times, and it's like, that's a cool ability. Do something more with that. That's really fucking menacing.
Because of that, the ending where Thor adopts his resurrected daughter just rings so hollow. Thor said,
I don't know if it rang hollow. I thought it was a nice ending. He lost Jane, but he had a stepdaughter to look after.
As he needs to embrace love. The fact that this seemed to move Gore,
not a stepdaughter, he had an adopted child to look after,
was like laughable to me. Whose daughter died because the gods don't seem to actually care about embracing love.
Well, that's the thing, but Thor is a god, and he took care of her daughter. So, yeah, Thor is the exception to that rule. It's part of why Gore chose to change his wish. His wish was originally kill all gods, but then he changed it to bring back my daughter.
And nothing in that equation had changed. The action in this movie is also really hard to...
Yeah, I don't... Like I said, I'm mostly on board with most of these critiques. I don't think they're as severe as he's making them out, but I'm mostly on board with most of these critiques. There's a couple I'm not 100% on board with, like that.
Get invested in, because the stakes never feel very high. Thor and...
Yeah, that's true. That is part of the issue with the humor intense beginning kind of lessens the field law.
Company are always doing comedy bits in the middle of battle, and they don't seem all that concerned about them. I mean, the cost of violence in this movie is such a mild and unimportant thing that Thor and Sif do like comedy riffs about her losing her arm as she still lays defeated on the battlefield. The movie clearly doesn't care that Sif was gravely injured, and it never really comes up again, so why should we? Lastly, there's the Jane Foster of it all. I liked how Jane's storyline was handled in Jason Aaron's Thor run, but I don't think it works here very well. It's very hard to get invested in Jane's story when it's surrounded by a movie that has so little in the way of actual stakes.
Okay, let's see if he dives more into it, because I actually thought Jane was the best handled character in this. I really like Jane. And that's saying something, because her character was not well handled in the previous movies. But yeah, here Here, she was really well handled. I like her.
I like the scene
here.
where Gore makes the connection between them clear. They're both mortals who have a weapon that's slowly draining them of life. But nothing is ever really done with that. Jane predictably sacrifices herself and has a death scene that's played like twice as dramatically as anything else in the movie, aside from...
Well, yeah, that's the big death of the movie. Of course it's going to be played dramatically. That's like the dramatic heartbeat of the movie. Of course you play that up.
Maybe that opening Gore scene. But even that is undercut by a terrible post-credit scene, which only lessens...
I don't get that. Like, the post-credit scene is essentially her in heaven. I don't see how that undercuts her
sacrifice.
But it doesn't undercut her sacrifice. She's still very much dead. We just get to see some of some of Valhalla, some of the Norse afterlife. That's all that
I love big cities, crowds, merrymaking, excitement, the good life. I shall go too. Hercules commands it.
In the end, Thor Love and Thunder feels like a mostly unsuccessful comedy sketch with an MCU plot sewn onto it. I have no problem with the movie going big on comedy, but it does so to the detriment of everything else. I really do think there's a worthwhile story in here somewhere, a sweeping epic even, about love, sacrifice, and the abuse of power. But Love and Thunder isn't interested in very much of that, and I think that's kind of a shame. I also think it's just not very funny, which may be the most damning thing of all. Whether you agree or disagree...
Yeah, I think it has some good... that might be the difference. Like, I see all the flaws he's talking about, but I probably found the jokes
with me on this movie. I know a lot of you would love a platform to get your thoughts out there. Mark has...
Okay, now we're going on to the commercial. Okay, so, my overall thoughts on that one... My overall thoughts on that one, I thought that was a decent video. I thought that was totally respectable. I did not get anti-woke vibes from that at all. Not at all. Yeah, I obviously I don't agree with him 100%. I obviously enjoyed the movie more than him, but like, yeah, it's not one of my favorites. I'm trying to think. It's not my least favorite from Phase 4. I'm trying to even think what would be my least favorite movie from Phase 4. Is it my least favorite movie from Phase 4? Shit, maybe it is. I don't know. Black Widow was fine. Either that or Black Widow are my least favorite from Phase 4. That being said, I think they're both fine. Not, like, if you're a fan of the Thor character, yeah, definitely you will enjoy this movie. And I think it's worth checking out. If you're a fan of the MCU, I think it's worth checking. You should probably check it out. You know, if you're not into this type of thing at all, then yeah, it's totally skippable. But I enjoy it. It's no Ragnarok by any means, but I would still definitely argue that as the second best Thor movie. I definitely prefer it over Dark World easily. And I'd even put it above the Kenneth Branagh original, which is fine. It's got its moments. But yeah, I think that's a respectable review. I did not get anti-woke vibes from that at all. I'm not, like I've always said, I'm not the most woke person ever, but my anti-woke senses from watching all these anti-woke assholes, my anti-woke senses were not tingling from that at all. It felt like he might go into that angle, but he never does. He always has genuine critiques. So, Captain Midnight, while I don't 100% agree with your review, it is a solid video. Good job.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.
Do you enjoy pain?
Pain don't hurt.